The diner was just as he remembered it, small, cozy, and filled with the comforting smell of fried onions and freshly brewed coffee. It had been years since he'd stepped foot inside this place, but nothing much seemed to have changed. The same old jukebox sat in the corner, though now it looked a little more worn out. The vinyl seats were cracked in places, and the walls were covered in faded posters advertising local bands from decades ago. To anyone else, it might have felt like stepping into a time capsule, but for him, it was something more. This place held memories of simpler days before life got complicated. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, feeling the warmth hit his face. Outside, the air was crisp and chilly, but here it felt like home. He glanced around, taking in the familiar sights: the counter where he used to sling burgers as a teenager, the booth where he'd shared laughter with friends after school, and the window seat that gave a perfect view of the street outside. That's where he chose to sit. As he slid into the booth, he couldn't help but notice how quiet everything was. Back in the day, the diner was always buzzing with noise, people chatting, plates clinking, the occasional burst of laughter. But tonight it was almost eerily calm. There were only a handful of customers scattered around the room, most of them lost in their own worlds. A man at the counter scrolled through his phone while sipping on a cup of coffee. An older couple sat near the entrance, sharing a plate of fries and talking softly. And then there was him, sitting alone by the window, trying not to draw attention to himself. He picked up the menu and scanned it, even though he already knew what he wanted. After so many meals eaten out of cans or ration packs, a juicy steak sounded like heaven. He signaled to the waitress, a young woman with curly brown hair tucked under her cap, and placed his order. "Medium rare, please," he said, giving her a polite nod. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax. This was supposed to be a treat, a way to celebrate being back home after so long. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the way people kept glancing at him when they thought he wasn't looking. Or maybe it was the fact that he hadn't been able to fully let his guard down since coming back. Whatever it was, it gnawed at him, making it impossible to enjoy the moment. His mind wandered back to the past few months, or rather, the past few years. Life overseas had been tough, tougher than he ever imagined it would be. He'd seen things that still haunted him, heard sounds that echoed in his dreams, and carried burdens that weighed heavier than any physical injury. Coming back was supposed to mean leaving all of that behind, starting fresh. But instead, it felt like he'd brought pieces of it home with him. At first, everyone had been excited to see him. His wife threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. Their daughter, who was only 3 when he left, barely recognized him at first. She stared at him with wide eyes, clutching her mother's leg until finally, tentatively, she reached out to touch his hand. Those early days were filled with hugs and questions, laughter and tears. For a brief period, it felt like everything might actually be okay, but reality quickly set in. Adjusting to civilian life wasn't easy. Things that once came naturally now felt foreign. Conversations about work or school felt trivial compared to the intensity of what he'd experienced. Even simple tasks, like grocery shopping or paying bills, felt overwhelming. Then there were the stares from strangers who noticed the limp in his walk, the scar on his cheek, or the tattoo on his arm that marked him as someone who had served. Most people didn't say anything, but he could feel their eyes on him, silently, judging or pitying him. Tonight, though, none of that mattered. He was here to eat a good meal, to take a break from the chaos swirling inside his head. As he waited for his steak, he watched the world go by outside the window. Cars drove past, headlights cutting through the darkness. People walked along the sidewalk, bundled up against the cold. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even. That's when he saw it, or rather them. Across the street, parked under a flickering street lamp, was a black SUV. At first glance, it didn't stand out. Black SUVs were everywhere these days. But something about this one caught his attention. Maybe it was the way it was idling, engine running, but not moving. Or maybe it was the 2 figures sitting inside, barely visible through the tinted windows. Whoever they were, they weren't there by accident. His stomach tightened and his heart began to race. Who were they? What did they want? And why did they seem to be watching him? He forced himself to look away, pretending not to notice. Maybe. It was nothing. Maybe he was just being paranoid. But deep down, he knew better. When the waitress returned with his drink, she leaned in close, speaking softly so only he could hear. "Sir," she whispered, "I need you to listen carefully. There are men outside who've been asking questions about you. They're parked across the street in a black SUV." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He froze, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. How did she know? Why was she telling him this? Before he could respond, she added, "Don't panic. Just act normal. Finish your meal if you can, then leave through the kitchen door. I'll make sure no one follows you." Her voice was calm, steady, almost reassuring, but her eyes told a different story. They were filled with urgency, determination, and maybe even a hint of fear. Without waiting for a reply, she straightened up, flashed him a professional smile, and walked away as though nothing unusual had happened. He sat there, stunned, staring at his untouched glass of water. The diner, which had felt so comforting just moments ago, suddenly seemed suffocating. His mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? Why was she helping him? And what exactly was going on? Outside, the SUV hadn't moved. Every time someone entered the diner, he flinched, half expecting trouble. Yet, despite the danger lurking nearby, he couldn't stop thinking about the waitress. Who was she, really? And what did she know that he didn't? For now, all he could do was wait. The waitress's words echoed in his mind like a warning siren. "There are men outside. They're parked across the street." He replayed them over and over, trying to make sense of what was happening. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Acting normal, that's what she'd told him to do. So he picked up his fork, cut a small piece of steak, and popped it into his mouth. The flavor barely registered. His focus was elsewhere, across the room. The waitress moved gracefully between tables, refilling drinks and clearing plates. To anyone watching, she seemed like just another employee doing her job. But every now and then, her eyes darted toward him, checking to see if he was okay. Each glance was quick, almost imperceptible, but it carried a message. Stay alert, he couldn't shake the feeling that this whole situation was surreal. Why would complete strangers be asking about him? And why would a waitress, a woman he'd never met before, risk getting involved? People didn't usually stick their necks out for others unless they had a reason. What was hers? His gaze drifted back to the window. The black SUV was still there, its engine idling quietly. The two figures inside hadn't moved either. One of them shifted slightly, adjusting his position, while the other remained still, staring straight ahead. Were they armed? Did they know he was onto them? Questions swirled in his head, each one more unsettling than the last as he chewed slowly. Trying to buy time, memories began flooding back, memories he'd spent years pushing down, burying deep where they couldn't reach him. Back during his second tour, he'd stumbled upon something big. Something ugly. It wasn't supposed to happen, not to someone like him. All he'd wanted was to serve his country, to protect the freedoms everyone took for granted. Instead, he found himself caught in a web of lies and corruption so tangled that even thinking about it made his stomach churn. It started with rumors, whispers among the soldiers about missing supplies, faulty equipment, and shady deals. At first, he dismissed them as baseless complaints. Things went wrong all the time in war zones. That was just part of the gig, but then came the accidents. Equipment failures that shouldn't have happened, lives lost unnecessarily. Men and women who trusted the system, only to find themselves betrayed by those higher up the chain. He couldn't stand by and do nothing. So he dug deeper, gathering evidence wherever he could. Documents, photos, recordings, it all added up to a damning picture of greed and negligence. When he finally reported it, he thought justice would prevail. That's what they always said. Right? Truth and accountability. But instead of being praised for his bravery, he became a target. Threats followed him everywhere, subtle at first, then increasingly blatant. Anonymous notes slipped under his door. Strange phone calls in the middle of the night. Even his fellow soldiers began treating him differently. Unsure whether to trust him or fear him, eventually he realized staying quiet was the only way to survive. He stopped talking about what he knew, stopped pursuing answers. By the time his discharge papers arrived, he was more than ready to leave everything behind: the desert heat, the constant fear, the weight of carrying secrets no one wanted to hear. Coming home was supposed to mean freedom, a fresh start. Yet here he was, sitting in a diner, staring at a suspicious vehicle outside, wondering if the past had finally caught up with him. The waitress appeared again, this time with a folded piece of paper tucked discreetly in her hand. She set it on the table next to his plate, her fingers brushing against the edge as though it were an accident. "Here's your check," she said brightly, loud enough for nearby customers to hear. Then, leaning in closer, she whispered, "Trust me, follow my lead." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the note. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. Written in neat, hurried handwriting were 3 simple words: "Kitchen exit now." His pulse quickened. This was it, the moment when he had to decide whom to trust. On one side there was the waitress, a stranger whose motives he didn't fully understand. On the other, there was the SUV and the unknown threat it represented. Logic told him to follow the waitress's advice. Instinct screamed at him to run. Either way, staying put wasn't an option. He glanced around the diner, taking stock of his surroundings. The older couple near the entrance was still sharing fries, oblivious to the tension building in the corner booth. The man at the counter scrolled through his phone, sipping his coffee without a care in the world. No one else seemed to notice anything unusual. If he acted fast, maybe he could slip out unnoticed. With a deep breath, he pushed his plate aside, leaving half his steak uneaten. Standing up felt like stepping into uncharted territory. Every movement felt exaggerated, as though the entire room was watching him. He grabbed his jacket from the seat beside him and slung it over his shoulder, keeping his head low. Then, without looking toward the window, he made his way toward the kitchen. The waitress was waiting for him, standing by the swinging double doors that led to the back. Her expression was calm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of anxiety. "Come on," she urged softly, holding the door open for him. "We don't have much time." Inside the kitchen, chaos reigned. Cooks shouted orders over the hiss of frying pans and the clatter of dishes. Steam rose from pots bubbling on the stove, filling the air with the rich aroma of spices and grease. The waitress navigated the cramped space with ease, weaving between staff members as though she owned the place. She motioned for him to follow her, leading him to a narrow hallway that branched off from the main cooking area. "This way," she said, glancing over her shoulder to ensure he was keeping up. "My car's parked out back. You'll be safe once we get moving." He hesitated for a split second, torn between gratitude and suspicion. Who was this woman, really? How did she know about the SUV? And why was she willing to risk her own safety to help him? But there was no time to dwell on those questions. Outside, the danger was real and growing closer with each passing second. At the end of the hallway, she pushed open a heavy metal door, revealing a dimly lit alleyway. A beat-up sedan sat a few feet away, its headlights casting faint beams onto the cracked pavement. "Get in," she instructed, tossing him a hoodie from the back seat, "and keep your head down. We'll talk once we're clear." He obeyed without argument, sliding into the passenger seat and pulling the hoodie over his head. As soon as he closed the door, she hopped into the driver's seat and started the engine. With a sharp turn, they sped out of the alley, tires screeching against the asphalt. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. She drove quickly but carefully, weaving through side streets and avoiding main roads. Occasionally, she checked the rearview mirror, scanning for any sign of pursuit. He watched her profile, studying the determination etched into her features. Whoever she was, whatever her reasons, she clearly meant business. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she pulled into the driveway of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The building loomed ahead, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. It looked like the kind of place people avoided at all costs, but for now, it offered sanctuary. "This belongs to my uncle," she explained, cutting the engine. No one comes here, you'll be safe for tonight. Safe, the word sounded foreign, almost laughable. After everything he'd been through, could he really believe it? Still, he nodded, stepping out of the car and following her inside. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain. His life had taken a turn he never saw coming. The warehouse was dark and cold, its air thick with the smell of rust and damp concrete. The only light came from the moon streaming through cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting long shadows across the floor. It wasn't exactly a welcoming place, but right now it felt like the safest spot on earth. As he stepped inside, his boots echoed against the empty space, the sound bouncing off the walls and reminding him just how alone they were. The waitress, his unlikely savior, closed the heavy metal door behind them, sealing out the world outside. She didn't waste any time. Pulling a flashlight from her bag, she clicked it on and swept the beam around the room. Dust motes floated lazily in the light, catching on old crates stacked haphazardly in corners and broken furniture scattered about. This wasn't the kind of place you'd expect anyone to call safe, but for tonight it would have to do. Sit down, she said, motioning toward an overturned crate near the center of the room. Her voice was steady, calm, almost as if she did this kind of thing every day. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to trust her completely, but fatigue and adrenaline finally won out. He sank onto the makeshift seat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. His mind raced, replaying everything that had happened over the past hour. None of it made sense. Not yet, anyway. She crouched down in front of him, placing the flashlight between them so its glow illuminated both their faces. For the first time, he got a good look at her. She couldn't have been more than 25, maybe younger. Her curly brown hair was tied back under her cap, but a few strands had escaped, framing her face. There was something fierce in her expression, a determination that seemed far beyond her years. But there was also kindness, a softness in her eyes that told him she wasn't doing this out of obligation or self-interest. Whatever her reasons were, they ran deep. You probably have a lot of questions, she began, her tone gentle but firm. I'll answer what I can, but we don't have much time. Those guys, they're not going to give up easily. He nodded, slowly, still processing everything. Who are you? He asked finally, his voice low and gravelly. And why are you helping me? She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself for what she was about to say. My brother, she started, pausing for a moment to collect her thoughts. He was in the military, a Marine. He died overseas about 4 years ago. Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. 4 years ago, that timeline lined up too perfectly with his own experiences. He remembered reading reports, hearing whispers about faulty equipment and botched missions. Soldiers dying because someone higher up decided profits mattered more than lives. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay focused. He was part of a unit that got sent out with gear that wasn't fit for combat. She continued, her voice trembling slightly now. It shouldn't have happened. If the supplies had been checked properly, if the people in charge had done their jobs, he might still be alive today. Her hands clenched into fists, knuckles white against the dim light. When I saw those men outside the diner, I recognized you immediately. I've seen your face online in news articles, social media posts. You're one of the whistleblowers, aren't you? The ones who tried to expose the corruption. His chest tightened. So she knew. Somehow, she'd pieced it together, connecting the dots between his past and the danger lurking outside. He wanted to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but there was no point. She already knew too much. I reported what I found, he admitted quietly, choosing his words carefully. But no one listened. They shut me down before I could get anywhere. After that, I kept my head down. Figured coming home would mean leaving all of it behind. But they didn't let you go, did they? She asked, her gaze piercing. People like them, they don't stop until they're sure you're silenced for good? Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She was right. Whoever was behind the SUV wasn't here by accident. They were hunting him, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And if it weren't for her intervention, they might have succeeded. So why help me? He pressed, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't even know me." She looked away for a moment, her jaw tightening. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that surprised him. "Because I'm tired of standing by while they destroy lives. My brother's death, it wasn't just some random tragedy. It was preventable. And if exposing the truth means stopping them from hurting anyone else, then I'll do whatever it takes." There was a long silence after that, broken only by the faint hum of electricity running through the old building. He studied her face, searching for any sign of hesitation or doubt. But there was none. She meant every word she said. For the first time since stepping into the diner earlier that evening, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. Maybe there were others out there who cared enough to fight back, to stand up against the injustice that had haunted him for so long. "What's your plan?" he asked finally, leaning forward. "If we're going to take them down, we need to be smart about it." A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips, the first real hint of warmth he'd seen from her all night. "That's where you come in," she said. "You've got evidence, don't you? Documents, photos, recordings, whatever you gathered during your tours. We can use that to build a case, to bring attention to what's really happening." He nodded slowly, his mind racing. Over the years, he'd hidden copies of everything he'd uncovered, storing them in secure locations where no one could find them. At the time, he hadn't known if he'd ever use them again. Now, it seemed like fate had other plans. "I'll need to retrieve them," he said cautiously. "But once I do, we'll have what we need to make noise, to force people to listen." "Good," she replied, her confidence growing. "In the meantime, I'll reach out to some contacts. There's a network of activists and journalists working to expose military corruption. They've been looking for someone like you, someone with first-hand knowledge of what's going on." As she spoke, he realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge or justice anymore. It was bigger than that. It was about honoring the sacrifices of those who had been lost, the soldiers who never came home, the families left behind, the countless lives shattered by greed and negligence. Together, they could shine a light on the darkness, forcing the world to see what had been hidden for so long. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. Sitting there, in that dingy warehouse surrounded by shadows and dust, he knew exactly what he needed to do next. The next few hours passed in a blur of planning and quiet determination. The two of them sat cross-legged on the cold, concrete floor of the warehouse, their makeshift workspace illuminated by the faint glow of her phone screen and the flashlight she'd brought along. She opened a notebook and began jotting down ideas, her pen moving quickly across the pages as if trying to keep up with the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. He watched her intently, marveling at how calm and focused she remained despite the gravity of what they were about to attempt. "First things first," she said, tapping the tip of her pen against the paper for emphasis. "We need to secure your evidence. Where is it? Is it safe?" He hesitated, weighing his words carefully before responding. Trust didn't come easily to him, not anymore, but something about her unwavering resolve made him want to believe. In her, still, he knew better than to reveal too much too soon. If anyone found out where the documents were hidden, everything could fall apart. "It's stored in multiple locations," he explained slowly, choosing his words with precision. "I split it up after I got back, just in case. Some of it's digital encrypted files saved on secure servers. The rest is physical, hard copies, photos, handwritten notes. I stashed them in places no one would think to look." She nodded thoughtfully, scribbling notes as he spoke. "That's smart," she said. "Splitting it up means even if they find one piece, they won't have the whole picture. But we'll need to consolidate it eventually. Once we gather everything, we can start reaching out to people who can help us expose this." Her confidence was contagious, and for the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't fighting alone. It was strange, almost surreal, to share this burden with someone else. For so long, he'd carried it all by himself, the guilt, the anger, the fear, and now here she was, offering not just her support, but her expertise. There was a fire in her eyes that told him she wasn't going to back down, no matter what happened. "So who exactly are these contacts you mentioned?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. And how do we know we can trust them? She smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness behind it. They're part of a loose network, a mix of journalists, activists, and whistleblowers who've been working to uncover corruption within the system. Most of them have personal stakes in this, just like me. One of the reporters lost a sibling overseas because of faulty equipment. Another uncovered shady contracts involving private contractors skimming funds meant for troops. They're good people, and they're careful. If we bring them solid proof, they'll help us get the word out. He listened intently, absorbing every detail. Her explanation painted a clearer picture of the scale of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just some isolated incident, it was part of a much larger pattern of greed and negligence that stretched across borders and industries. And while the scope of it was overwhelming, it also gave him clarity. They weren't just fighting for justice. They were fighting for accountability, for transparency, for the countless lives that had been lost or ruined because of unchecked power. But getting the evidence isn't enough, she continued, flipping to a fresh page in her notebook. We need to think strategically. These guys, they're dangerous. We can't afford any mistakes. Every move we make has to be calculated. He nodded in agreement, his expression serious. What about laying low? Those men outside the diner, they're still out there somewhere. How do we stay ahead of them? That's step 2, she replied, her voice firm. For now, you're safest here. No one knows about this place except my uncle, and he doesn't use it anymore. While you're hiding out, I'll handle the logistics. I'll reach out to my contacts, set up secure channels for communication, and figure out the best way to release the information without putting either of us in more danger. Her plan sounded solid, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that nothing was foolproof. People died for less than what they were attempting. Still, he trusted her instincts. If anyone could pull this off, it was her. As the night wore on, they worked tirelessly, mapping out every possible scenario and contingency plan. She taught him how to encrypt messages and communicate securely using burner phones and anonymous email accounts. In return, he shared fragments of his story, piecing together the events that led him to this moment. It wasn't easy reliving those memories, the accusations, the threats, the isolation, but talking about it somehow made the weight feel lighter. Sharing it with someone who understood, who cared, made all the difference. At one point, she paused mid-sentence, rubbing her temples as exhaustion began to creep in. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes and realized she must have been running on adrenaline for hours. Despite her fatigue, she refused to stop, pushing herself harder than anyone he'd ever met. You should rest, he said gently, gesturing toward an old mattress propped against the wall. You've done enough. For tonight, let me take over for a bit. She shook her head firmly, though there was a flicker of gratitude in her expression. Not yet, she replied. There's still too much to do. Besides, I'm used to pulling all-nighters. You're the one who needs to conserve your energy. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Reluctantly, he backed down, knowing she wouldn't budge. Instead, he offered to grab them both some water from the small cooler she'd brought along. As he handed her a bottle, their fingers brushed briefly, and for a fleeting moment he felt a connection deeper than words could express. They were strangers brought together by circumstance, united by a shared purpose. Whatever happened next, they would face it side by side. By the time dawn broke, they had a rough outline of their strategy. The immediate goal was simple: retrieve the evidence without drawing attention. From there, they would coordinate with her network to leak the information to the public in stages, ensuring maximum impact while minimizing risk. It was a risky game, but neither of them had any intention of backing down. As sunlight filtered through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting golden streaks across the dusty floor, she stood up and stretched, cracking her neck and rolling her shoulders. All right, she said with a determined smile. Let's get to work. Today's the first step toward setting things right. He rose to his feet, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was fighting. And he wasn't alone. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the warehouse began to warm up, though it still carried the chill of the night before. The two of them had worked through dawn, finalizing their plan and double-checking every detail. Now, with a clear path forward, they allowed themselves a brief moment to breathe. She sat on the edge of the mattress they'd dragged into the center of the room, sipping from a bottle of water while he paced back and forth, his mind racing with possibilities. "This is it?" she said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying the weight of what they were about to do. "Once we put this out there, there's no turning back. Are you ready for that?" He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression resolute. "I've been running for years," he replied, his tone firm. "Hiding, trying to forget. But I can't keep doing that, not when so many people are counting on us. If this is my chance to make things right, then I'm ready." Her lips curved into a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was sadness there, but also pride. Pride in him, in what they were about to accomplish. "You're not alone in this," she reminded him. "No matter what happens, we're in it together." Those words hit him harder than he expected. For so long he'd carried the burden of his past by himself, convinced that no one else could understand what he'd been through. But now, sitting here with her, he realized how wrong he'd been. People cared, people wanted to help. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to tip the scales in their favor. The first step was retrieving the evidence. Over the next few days, they moved carefully, sticking to back streets and avoiding busy areas whenever possible. She drove him to each location where he'd hidden pieces of the puzzle, keeping watch while he retrieved what he needed. Each trip was nerve-wracking. Every corner they turned a potential threat. But they stuck to the plan, trusting in the precautions they'd taken to stay off the radar. At one point, as they pulled into a deserted parking lot behind an old storage facility, she glanced at him and asked, "Do you ever wonder why you're the one who has to do this? Why it fell to you to carry all of this?" He thought about it for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "Maybe because I saw it firsthand," he said slowly. "Because I couldn't ignore it. Not after everything I witnessed. Some people might call it bad luck, but I think it's more than that. Maybe I was meant to be here doing this, to honor the ones who didn't make it." She nodded silently, her gaze fixed on the horizon. He could tell she understood. After all, she'd lost someone too. Her brother's death wasn't just a memory, it was a driving force, a reason to fight for justice. Together they shared a bond forged in loss, strengthened by hope. By the end of the week, they had everything they needed. Stacks of documents, encrypted files loaded onto a secure drive, and photographs documenting years of corruption. It was overwhelming, the sheer volume of proof they'd gathered. But instead of feeling daunted, they felt empowered. This was their weapon, their way of fighting back against a system that had failed so many. Their next move was to contact her network. Late one night, she set up a secure video call using a laptop borrowed from a trusted friend. Faces appeared on the screen, some familiar to her, others new. Journalists, activists, whistleblowers, all united by a common goal. She introduced him briefly, explaining his role and the importance of the evidence he'd brought to the table. They listened intently, asking questions and offering suggestions. One of the reporters, a wiry man with sharp features and glasses, perched on the bridge of his nose, spoke up. "This is big," he said, his voice tinged with both excitement and caution. "If we play our cards right, we can turn this into a national story, but we have to be smart about it. Timing is everything." Another voice chimed in, belonging to a woman with close-cropped hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "We'll need to release it in phases," she advised. "Start with the most damning pieces of evidence, build momentum, and then drop the rest. That way, even if they try to discredit us, we'll already have public opinion on our side." Everyone agreed, and over the course of the meeting, they hammered out a timeline for releasing the information. Social media campaigns, press releases, interviews, it was all laid out, step by step. By the time the call ended, they had a roadmap to follow. A blueprint for exposing the truth. As the days passed, the reality of what they were doing began to sink in. Every email sent, every document uploaded, every phone call made brought them closer to the moment when the world would know the truth. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and exhausting all at once. But neither of them wavered. They pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. Finally, the day arrived. The first wave of evidence hit the internet like a tidal wave, spreading across platforms faster than anyone could have anticipated. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately, headlines screaming about corruption, cover-ups, and betrayal. Public outrage grew with each passing hour, fueled by the undeniable proof laid bare for everyone to see. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. Not because the battle was over, it was far from it, but because they'd struck a blow against the darkness. They'd given a voice to those who couldn't speak for themselves, honored the memories of those who had been lost, and forced the world to confront the ugly truths it had tried so hard to ignore. That evening, as they stood outside the warehouse watching the sun dip below the horizon, she turned to him and smiled. "We did it," she said simply. "Not all of it, but enough to start making a difference." He nodded, his heart swelling with gratitude and determination. "And we're not done yet," he added. "There's still more work to do, more lives to fight for." Together, they looked toward the future, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them head on. Because sometimes standing up for what's right isn't just a choice, it's a calling. And they had answered it loud and clear.